Hello, this is Paul Chek. Welcome back to my video blog. We're on our Movement as Medicine series. This is part 3 on stretching. Some of the concepts I will share today will be a follow-through or an expansion on what we talked about in my previous blog on mobilization. Once again, there's a lot of very valuable practical information you can apply immediately for instant results. In my book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy, there's a comprehensive section on stretching. There's 20 stretch tests that I put together that can be used to specifically balance your body. For those of you that want to get more into the science and the complexities of stretching and the different types of stretching, and who want to have a more comprehensive length tension assessment, which is length tension assessment means to identify the length and the tension of your muscles to specifically isolate which ones need stretching and which tissues need to be released manually, etc. My Golf Biomechanics Manual, Chapter 3 on stretching, is a fair step up in complexity from How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy. So it's going to be more appropriate for people that are athletes, people that have more of an interest in the science of stretching or the technical elements of stretching. But there's quite a bit in there. Okay, that said, let's get started. Yeah, baby. Okay, stretching. Well, stretching has pretty much the identical functional offering that mobilization does, and stretching could be considered to be a form of mobilization. So what are we doing when we're stretching? Well, we're normalizing muscles. We're improving the balance and the flow of energy through muscles and their functional capacity. Remember, all joints have agonists, prime movers, antagonists, control muscles, and neutralizers. Neutralizers are muscles that counteract the action of other muscles. So for example, to abduct my arm, my anterior deltoid, which has a tendency to medially rotate the arm, has to be counterbalanced by the action or neutralized by the action of the posterior deltoid, which is a posterior rotator of the shoulder. So if you want to bring your hand up straight in the frontal plane like that, the anterior and posterior deltoids have to neutralize each other. So you have agonist, antagonist, and neutralizer functions. And when muscles become shortened, bound up, get trigger points in them, get traumatized, get scar tissue in them, those functional relationships can be disrupted. And even though the message from the brain is intact, the way the body carries it out becomes disrupted. Just for example, if you're driving a car that has a front end misalignment, your concept of your brain is that you should be able to let go of the steering wheel and the car should go straight. But if you're in someone else's car you've never driven and you let go of the wheel, it could swerve off to the side of the road because it has a functional imbalance. So to normalize the function of the vehicle, you'd have to give it a front end alignment. And to normalize the function of joints, we often have to work to create optimal alignment. But because the body's alignment factors are dynamic, they're constantly moving, if we have limitations in muscle movement due to binding factors, we become like that car, and you can never stop muscling the steering wheel. And if you do that long enough and you get into a normal car, guess what? You'll end up driving that car off the opposite side of the road. If the car was towing right and you had to pull with your left arm to keep it going straight, and you get in a normal car, you'll find yourself thinking, now this car's going left. So you're likely to think there's something wrong with the car, but it's because you've become conditioned. Conditioned. Remember that word. Okay? So connective tissues are also affected through stretching significantly. Cells are affected, fluid flow is affected, and joints are affected because muscles control joints. So whenever you have joint problems, one of the things you always have to do is look to see what's going on in the muscles, which is why in our last segment I quoted Hiltons Law. The nerve that innervates the joint innervates the muscles of the joint, and the skins over the origin and insertion of such muscles. So I gave you that law as it relates to the joints, but now I want to remind you that it says the muscles of the joint. Therefore, if you have a problem in a joint it could be the result of problems in the muscles of the joint or the muscles that cross the joint. So you can never separate a muscle problem from a joint problem. The two are like mirroring each other. They're like Siamese twins. If you hurt the shoulder joint, you hurt the function of the shoulder muscles or alter it. If you hurt the muscles of the shoulder, you're going to disrupt the mechanics of the joint. Okay? And then also we're going to improve the functional synergy and flow of energy through the chakra system. And the chakra systems are our interface with subtle energy. So thoughts and emotions, for example, come by way of subtle energy, and then they are transferred into the body through a step-down transformer process. If you're interested in learning more about that, look up the research of William A. Tiller, or look at the Encyclopedia of Energy Anatomy by Cynthia Dale. Lots in there. There's many other researchers on this. Those are just a couple of good ones that you can read. So now when it comes to stretching, we're just going to take a quick review. Yesterday I talked about transition zones, and I talked about the importance of understanding that the psyche is the overarching controller. It was the top of the Chek totem pole. Breathing was next, etc. And so what we see here with stretching is that whenever we're changing the length-tension relationships or the fluid flow through muscles or any of the dynamics of muscles, we're also affecting the visceral system and our psyche, because the body and the mind are not separate things. We have a body-mind. So whatever you're doing to the body is going to manifest as some change in the mind. Whatever you do in your mind manifests as some change in the body. So whenever it comes to stretching, one of your big tips here is to realize that whenever you have muscles that you're stretching and they're not loosening up, it means that you're probably addressing a symptom of a problem that you have not identified. So a common example is many people have inflammation in their guts. Many athletes have inflammation in their guts. One of the most common injuries amongst athletes is low back pain and hamstring injuries. If the guts are inflamed, the brain has to use the hamstring muscles to try to stabilize the pelvis. It has not really much other option. So what you see is a lot of lateral hamstring tension that's chronic that will not go away in people that have core dysfunctions. So here's the point. If you have a core dysfunction, you're likely to have chronically tight hamstrings, and you can stretch them 3 times a day, but the day you stop stretching those things, those muscles tighten right back up. And as a matter of fact, you could find in a person like that, they can stretch in the morning, and by noon they're tight. Stretch, by evening they're tight. Why? Because the more they're moving their body, the more workload there is being placed on those muscles to compensate for something somewhere else. So remember, the body is a kinetic chain system, and be wise enough to look for what's causing the problem, which you can only do by knowing the functional relationships, which are well listed in my book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy. Page 121, you see the piano spine chart. Page 100 and 101, you see the psychological influences, visceral influences, hormonal influences charted out for you. So whenever you have imbalances in the system, it's always important to look for what else is sharing a neurological relationship or a hormonal relationship with the key muscles. And those correlations are easily identified through the chakra system, which shows which body parts correlate to the psychological themes. Okay? Now, if you want to read a neat little book, there's a great little book called Cymatics by Thomas Hanna. And he summarizes this body-mind mirroring process where our emotions affect our muscles by breaking it down into 2 basic groupings. One he calls the red light posture, 2 the green light posture. So people that have a negative disposition or a negative orientation to the world, they're usually saying no to new ideas, no to new experiences. So people that are in the no mode, shall we say, are in a bracing mode. They're closing down their energy systems, and they're like they're being braced for some kind of a blow all the time, or they're ready for combat all the time. That pulls your body forward and down, just like you're getting ready to wrestle somebody, winds the body up, causes shortening of the abdominal wall, disruption of the breathing, brings the head down and forward, and causes a series of imbalances throughout the body. And many people will go to therapists and get stretches and mobilizations for this, but it doesn't change very much. Why? Because the mind is imprinting that posture into the body, and it's also increasing the tone, the flow of fluids, the balance of the autonomic nervous system to support the cognitive perception of the individual. So if your perception is that you're afraid, or that you're being manipulated, or that people are bad, or etc., then your body will mirror that, and all the stretching in the world will not address the problem. It'll just be like washing your car before a rainstorm comes. It'll just be a waste of time and energy because you're not actually dealing with the cause of the problem. The green light posture is one in which the person is upright and open, and the green light posture is saying, yes, I engage, yes, I participate, yes, I'm willing. So those are very simple examples of a very, very complex process that is very, very real, and I've spent a lot of time working with these issues and a lot of people, and I've had plenty of chance to experiment with them and investigate them, and I can tell you that they're very real. Okay? So now when it comes to techniques, there's different techniques for stretching. Here are the common ones. Now certainly if I want to do an exhaustive list, I could come up with more, but I can't really do that on a blog, and I've got books for you. Static stretching means stretching a muscle and then holding it statically anywhere from 20 to 60 seconds is fairly normal. Static stretching allows what's called creep to occur. If you hold tension on connective tissues, they begin to creep, which means to progressively lengthen. Each person has a maximum amount of creep they can get before they injure the muscle. Many people, especially martial artists that I've had to rehab, have injured the connective tissue of the muscle system by overstretching and using too much tension. Once you go outside the range of creep, you now injure the connective tissue, and with any given stretching, session, there's a certain amount of creep you can get. A little tip for you: if you're dehydrated, your connective tissues will perform much more poorly and be much less dynamic. Post-isometric relaxation, PR stretching, means where before I was doing a static stretch, now I might put my hand against a wall, contract my muscles like I'm trying to pull my arm forward, and then after 5 seconds just relax and stretch the muscle out. That would be post-isometric relaxation. Contract, relax. A more technical form, and probably a little bit more comprehensive form, is called crack stretching. Contract, relax, antagonist, contract. So in that model, what I would do is I would be using a post-isometric contraction, so I stretch, isometrically contract, contract, relax, and then I use my antagonist muscles to fire the muscles going in the opposite direction so that the nervous system's actually causing the stretch to happen on the opposing muscles. I like that technique a lot because the brain's actually learning how the flexibility is taking place and how to recreate that experience for itself. Static stretching is a little different because if you look at the research on static stretching, you'll see that the spindle cells start to fire more and more as the muscle gets tighter, but after a while the system adapts and the nervous system, shall we say, goes silent. The problem with that is the brain has a harder time integrating those changes in your stretch because once the nervous system goes silent, it's not recording the length change. So you can get up, move around, but you run the risk of the brain not remembering how to reproduce that new experience, and your conditioning will put you back into your red light, green light posture, etc. There is a very specific use for static stretching, which is largely what I will explain to you as corrective stretching in a moment, but there is limitations to it. So dynamic stretching is using movement. So for example, if I want to warm my hamstrings up for a deadlift, I can do the waiter's bow stretch, pretend I'm serving wine in a fancy restaurant, and stretch my hamstrings until I feel a nice stretch on them. and then I can come back out. In, hold, 1, 2, 3, out. In, hold, 1, 2, 3, out. With dynamic stretching, I like to use less than 5-second contractions so that there's movement. And wherever there's movement, there's information. So as we're doing dynamic stretching, we're using the heat in the connective tissues and the warmth of the system and metabolism to warm the tissues, but we're using movement patterns that are congruent with the activity that we want to perform. So if you're going to warm up for tennis, you want to use dynamic movements that would look like the sport of tennis. And as you do that, your body warms into that specific pattern. The key thing about dynamic stretching is there's no inhibitory influences on the system, such as contract, relax, or static stretching. Therefore, the brain is very on top of what's happening and can integrate the changes immediately. Types of stretching: pre-event stretching, that means to stretch your body before an event. And there are concerns, which I cover in my golf biomechanics manual, such as the dangers of using static stretching before an event because of the inhibitory influences and the fact that the body can actually get confused because the brain has not been able to record the changes. So I explain those things in my book. You got post-event, which means to stretch your body after an athletic event. Now, the Russians did research and found that after most athletic events, an athlete's nervous system and metabolism stayed elevated for as much as 4 hours. So when it came to doing things like post-event massage therapy and post-event stretching, the conclusion was it's better to wait, ideally about 4 hours, to do your post-event stretching, because if you do it immediately after the event, your metabolism and your nervous system are so wound before you can even get to the car, you're going to have those muscles wind back up again. That does not mean I wouldn't do post-event stretching immediately after an event. It just means I would not assume that my post-event stretch immediately after, say, a 10K is going to have nearly the therapeutic effort that a post-event stretch done when the system is calm would have. Corrected stretching largely deals with changing the length of muscles for the long run. So if a person has shortened hamstrings and it's disrupting the balance of their pelvis, corrective stretching would be designed to lengthen the fascial envelopes, and this is where we use primarily static stretching. If I really want to lengthen fascia, I need longer time under tension. Whenever you put tension on connective tissues, it generates heat. The process of thixotropy is the process by which heat causes the connective tissue to, shall we say, soften and dissolve somewhat, so the ground substance of the connective tissue gets softer and allows the molecules of the connective tissue to begin to separate from each other. Okay? Maintenance stretching is what we do when we have a pattern of muscle tension that's common to a given work or sport activity or to our unique body composition. So for example, if someone doesn't know they have gut problems, they're likely to have chronic back tension and hamstring tension for the reasons I mentioned earlier. So if a person doesn't know what to do because they don't understand the correlations, but they need to get rid of this tension and it might disrupt, say, their golf game, maintenance stretching means once I identify the muscles that either get sore from the activity that I'm doing, golf, running, whatever, I must maintain normal balance by stretching those specific muscles. Or maintenance stretching means I've got muscles that seem to keep tight, I'm not sure why, but I need to keep maintaining a normal balance so I don't get hurt or have disrupted body-mind experiences. So some tips for stretching. One, what is your dream? If you don't know what you want to create out of your body, I got news for you. You're going to recreate what you were creating before, consciously or unconsciously. That's just how it works. Your psychological disposition mirrors itself in your body, i.e. red light or green light. So whenever you're stretching, it's a good idea to have a clear vision of your dream of yourself, and as you're stretching, you should be breathing that consciousness right into your body. So visualizing yourself as optimal, visualizing yourself as functional to the degree that it matches your dream. Breathing is very, very important with stretching most people have a tendency to stretch too hard. As I said in mobilization, breathing has a facilitating effect on stretching. Some stretches respond better with inhalation when you're stretching. Some stretches respond better with exhalation. I don't have time to go into the great detail of that, but by experimenting with yourself, you can learn these things. 3, don't force it. Many people get hurt stretching. I have a great big rip in my hamstring muscles from when I was in martial arts training, and we used to stretch in pairs quite often. And one of my partners was a bit of a wise guy, and back in those days I could put my foot up to about here, and we'd have a partner help you get your toes up to the wall, and he just pushed it real fast one day, and it sounded like a gunshot going off. So to this day I got a great big rip in my hamstring. Those are the kinds of things that happen when you force stretching. If you watch athletes, you often see them bouncing and doing all sorts of aggressive stretching. That excites the nervous system and actually has an antagonistic effect on muscle function and preparedness. So don't force it. If you find yourself forcing stretches, it's a great indicator that you're mentally, emotionally wound up, and you should spend some time breathing, relaxing, doing some Tai Chi or Qigong before you stretch, so you don't waste your time stretching and irritate your system. Next, number 4, the greater the pain, the less the effort you should use. Whenever there's pain in muscles, you have facilitation. The law of facilitation says when an impulse passes once through a given set of neurons to the exclusion of others, it tends to do so on a future occasion, and each time it traverses this path, the resistance will be smaller. So wherever you're in pain, you're facilitated. The fibers of the muscle that hurt the most are the most excited, and therefore it takes the least amount of pressure to activate the most excited fibers. If you stretch as though you had no pain, you can actually traumatize the injured fibers and have a significant negative effect from your stretching. So remember the basic rule: the more pain I have in any part of my body I'm stretching, the more gently I stretch, and the more breath control becomes important. Technique. Use the technique that's best for you. Static, post-isometric, crack, or dynamic. Those techniques have a huge influence on the outcome, and there are specific times for specific techniques, as I show in my Golf Biomechanics manual. Feedback. Remember, your body's always giving you information. Why are my hamstrings tight all the time? If you don't know, open up How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy and read, or find somebody with more knowledge and skill so you can interpret the body's messages to you. Chronic changes in the body are a very important feedback mechanism, and the feedback, as I said earlier, is also one in which, where you have chronic problems with muscles, you want to look at the glands, the organs, and the psychological themes that are related to that. And many people have seen me do demonstrations in my scientific stretching course where I just look at what's going on with their body and immediately begin asking them questions about what's going on in their life. And there's been many people whose eyes were watering and were very, very freaked out that I could see and perceive the intimate details of their life by looking at their body. But when you practice something for 30 years, you get good at it. Okay? 7, consistency. For stretching to work, there needs to be some degree of consistency, and the greater the challenge you're having, the more important consistency is. The more important your athletic performance is to you, the more important consistency with stretching is, and the more important your psychological and spiritual growth and evolution is, the more important it is to be consistent with your stretching, because you need feedback for growth. Feedback, as they say, is the breakfast of champions. No feedback, no champion. So whatever you want to champion, it will require the consistency to give you an intimate relationship with your body, and that can only happen if there's feedback, and you have to have a level of awareness and open-mindedness, because most of the red light people resist hearing the feedback or even knowing the feedback because they're too invested in their dogma. That's my stretching presentation for you today. I will be back with part 4, which I believe is working in, and 5 will be working out, if I remember correctly. Even if I'm wrong, I'll be back with something. Thanks for joining me today. Hope you enjoy studying the resources I've shared. Look forward to seeing you in my Chek Exercise Coach program or HLC program where you can learn all this stuff and much, much more. Remember, what I'm sharing here, this is the tip of the iceberg, baby. I got so much more in here to help you out. It's amazing. Can't wait to share it with you. See you soon.